And welcome to the Free Your Geek podcast, and welcome to Fantasy Fable Friday. Hopefully, you've been enjoying learning a bit more about Milo Sharproot. And I thought it might be a cool thing to string all these 5 episodes together and bring Milo's tale together in full. And along the way, you get to hear me make some mistakes and faux pas because if you listen carefully, I pronounced herbs as herbs for the first 2 chapters, which I realized but didn't bother to go back and edit. And I've really enjoyed kind of recording these shorter episodes as it allowed me to put out more content a lot quicker. And it's especially true in an area that I personally geek out about within tabletop role playing games, specifically Dungeons and Dragons. Plus, it's been super fun getting to share some of Milo's backstory with you. And speaking of D&D, a special shout out goes to my Curse of Strahd crew that I play with every other Wednesday. To Hannah, our DM, Mo, Nicole, Mary, Zay, and Tad, thank you so much for welcoming me, and by extension Milo, to your table. Playing with you has really helped me bring Milo's story to life, and I truly appreciate all of you. And I truly appreciate all the listeners who took their time out to check out the story of Milo Sharproot. Thank you all so very much. And please stay tuned in the upcoming weeks for more Fantasy Fable Fridays on Free Your Geek. Episode 1, Roots of the Vale. Thimblethorn Vale was quiet and steady, a pocket of green hidden from the rush of the outside world. Tall trees bent their branches together, filtering sunlight into thin streams that warmed the moss below. The air smelled of earth, water, and wood smoke. Birds called in the mornings. Crickets took over at night. Nothing here was fast. Nothing tried to dominate. Life in the vale moved with the patience of the roots that held it. At the center of this quiet lived the Sharproot family. Their cottage sat near a bend in the creek, built from fieldstone and heavy timbers. A crooked chimney leaned against the roof, its smoke curling lazily into the sky. A garden stretched out behind the house, rows of chives and carrots tended with care, and one corner left wild for herbs and mushrooms. It was a simple home, but it belonged fully to the land around it. Tamlin Sharproot, the father, was a stone shaper. His hands were scarred from years of hammer and chisel, but he carried strength in silence. He carved wells and hearths for the vale, steady work that left its mark long after he was gone. Brinna, his wife, was the village healer. Her teas and root salves eased fever and pain, and she believed that a kind word could heal as much as medicine. Together, they filled the house with quiet strength. Their children, Milo and Mira, could not have been more different. Milo was the elder, stocky, watchful, and built with the muscle of someone who trained daily. He moved as if always braced for trouble. His hazel eyes missed little, and his silence often carried more than his words. He had inherited his father's stillness, his jaw always set, as if expecting the world to test him. Mira, 2 years younger, lived in the vale as though she were part of its wind. She moved lightly, laughed easily, and gathered herbs and flowers with a sense of purpose only she understood. The woods seemed to welcome her. Birds lingered near her humming. Vines seemed to part for her steps. Where Milo held tension, Mira carried ease. The two clashed often, though never deeply. Milo grumbled at her carelessness, and Mira teased him for his scowl. He patched her satchel straps when they wore thin, and she left the best berries from her foraging on his plate. They were opposites in spirit, but bound by the kind of loyalty that needed no words. The veil itself gave them work and meaning. Tamlin's carvings marked boundaries and hearths. Brianna's teas soothed fevers. Mira's satchel overflowed with herbs and flowers, many of which she convinced her mother to try in new blends. Milo trained in the hunter circle, learning the steps and swings of weapons, preparing for the day he might be asked to defend his home. In the evenings they often gathered beneath the willow fire tree, a silver-leaved sentinel in the edge of the veil. Milo polished his flail there, its leather grip oiled and ready, while Mira wove chains of flowers. To others, it looked like a study in contrast, one child all storm and iron, the other light and laughter. But beneath those differences lay an unspoken tether. The forest around them was older than memory, its roots twisting deep, its stones marked with carvings long forgotten. Mira felt at ease in these mysteries, believing its silence to be a kind of welcome. Milo felt otherwise. To him, the woods carried a weight that pressed on the chest. Silence, he thought, was not safety. It was warning. One part of the forest that troubled him most, the western glade. It was too still, too hushed, a place where even birds refused to sing. He had seen strange prints there, pressed too deep for deer. He felt its danger the way others felt cold rain on their skin. Mira thought him overly cautious, but Milo carried the unease like stone in his chest. That night, as the family settled into their cottage, the vale seemed calm, its rhythm unbroken. The hearth warmed the stone walls. Brianna's teas filled the room with gentle fragrance. Tamlin's silence held steady. Mira's laughter softened the shadows one last time before bed. Outside, though, the trees leaned close, as if watching. And though peace seemed to hold the veil, it was a fragile kind of peace. Fragile things, Milo knew, rarely lasted. Episode 2. Mist over the glade. Morning came wrapped in fog. It clung low to the ground, drifting around stones and hedges like smoke that had forgotten how to rise. The Sharproot cottage was warm with the smell of oak wood and tea, but its table felt incomplete. One chair sat empty. Mira had slipped out before dawn, her satchel likely full of herbs and plans. Milo noticed, but he did not ask. To speak it aloud would only confirm what he already knew. Instead, he ate in silence, bread and eggs heavy in his stomach, and when the meal was done, he strapped on his vest and flail. The hunter circle waited on the edge of the vale. It was a clearing of dirt and trampled ferns, with many scarred posts standing as reminders of years of practice. Here, the restless youth trained to guard their home. Here, bruises taught lessons more lasting than words. Mist drifted across the circle as Milo joined the others. His father Tamlin stood beside old Kester Thornhill, the quartermaster whose beard was as white as snow and whose hands curled like twisted roots. Kester's eyes, clouded but sharp, swept across the trainees as they formed their lines. Milo felt the man's gaze linger on him, heavy with knowing. The morning filled with the sound of practice, boots scuffing earth, wooden weapons striking padded vests, the grunts of effort. Milo moved as he was taught. Step, swing, guard, strike again. His body followed the drills, but his mind wandered. He thought of the empty chair at breakfast. He thought of Mira's habits of pulling her satchel straps tighter when she meant to wander farther than promised. His strikes grew harder, less controlled. Each swing carried weight it did not need. Sweat stung his eyes. He finished his match with a sharp blow that knocked his partner stumbling back. The others clapped their approval, but Milo barely heard them. His ears were tuned to the forest beyond, waiting. The sound came suddenly. It split the quiet like a tree trunk tearing open. A roar, low and ancient, rolled through the woods. It was deeper than any bear, heavier than any boar. It came from the west, from the glade. The vale reacted at once. Birds burst into the sky in a storm of wings, their cries fading as they scattered. The mist seemed to shudder, then fell still. Every branch, every blade of grass seemed to pause. Milo felt the sound inside his chest. It rattled his ribs, shook something in his marrow. It was not only noise, it was meaning, a warning older than memory. The wooden flail dropped from his hand, forgotten in the moss. His legs moved before thought could stop them. He left the circle, running for the trees. Voices called after him, but they faded as quickly as they rose. He was already gone. The forest swallowed him. Branches clawed at his arms. Roots snared his boots. And fog pulled at his legs like water. His lungs burned. His chest heaved. Still he ran. Each stride hammered into the earth like a plea. The silence that followed the roar was worse than the sound itself. No birds sang now. No crickets whispered. The woods were hollow. It was the kind of hush that came only before blood. Milo's thoughts narrowed to a single point. He had not seen her, not yet. But certainty pressed on him all the same. Mira was in the glade. She had believed the forest loved her. She had believed its silence was safety. Milo knew better. Silence meant danger. The trees began to thin. Mist stretched out in pale ribbons ahead. The air felt heavier with every step. The glade was waiting, and with it, the truth Milo had feared since dawn. Episode 3: The Forest Wormling. The glade opened before Milo without warning. One moment the forest pressed in close. The next he stood at its edge, staring into a hollow carved from the trees. Light spilled through gaps in the canopy, turning the moss floor gold. For an instant, the place seemed almost holy, like a secret the forest meant to keep. but the peace was false. In the middle of the clearing, Mira lay on the ground. Her satchel was ripped open, herbs and petals scattered in the moss like broken charms. Over her loomed a creature that belonged more to story than to flesh. A wormling of the forest. It was long and coiled, its green scales streaked with moss and thorns. Its horns bent back like black antlers. Its wings were jagged at the edges, more like shattered glass than living tissue. Eyes glowed with sickly light, gold and green at once, and its claws dug deep trenches in the ground beside Mira's body. For years the wormlings had been nothing more than warnings told to children. Yet here one stood, breathing rot into the Vale's heart. Milo moved without thinking. His flail was already in his hand, the leather grip biting into his palm. There was no time to plan, no space for fear. His only thought was that Mira was beneath the beast, and she was alive. He struck hard. The flail cracked against the wormling's shoulder, the impact jolting up his arm. The creature reared back, hissing through jagged teeth. One claw lashed out, tearing through Milo's side. His vest was split, his skin burned with sudden pain, and blood spread hot across his ribs. He staggered, but swung again. The flail caught the beast in the ribs, making it shriek with a sound that was half animal, half something older. Its tail swept low, striking him like a club. Milo crashed into the ground, breath ripped from his chest, vision flashing white. The wormling towered over him, wings flaring wide, eyes blazing like fire behind leaves. Its breath washed over him, foul and heavy, the smell of decay and deep soil. Milo forced himself up. His body screamed to stop, but he rose anyway. Step by step he pushed forward, flail raised. His strikes came wild, fueled not by skill, but by sheer will. Each blow was meant to drive the beast back, to buy even a moment more of life for the sister lying behind it. The wormling shrieked again. With a sudden twist, it gathered itself, wings snapping open. Branches broke as if launched into the air, its body ripping through the canopy. In a storm of torn leaves and scattered moss, it was gone. Silence fell hard. Milo stumbled across the glade to Mira. He dropped to his knees, pulling her into his arms. Blood soaked her dress where the claws had torn her. Her breaths were shallow, uneven, her skin pale as frost. He pressed his hands against the wound, desperate to stop the flow, but the truth was clear. His strength could not hold back what the forest had already claimed. Her chest rose weakly once, twice, then faltered. Her hand twitched against his wrist and grew still. Her necklace had broken in the fight, beads scattered across the ground. One of them remained near his knee, the small, cracked wooden bead she had once called her favorite. The one she held to her heart with laughter. The one she had treasured. The one she had said reminded her of him, rough, stubborn, and unyielding. He picked it up with trembling hands, pressed it to his heart, and in that instant something inside him screamed louder than his voice ever could. The sound tore through the glade, raw and shattering, but the forest did not answer. It had taken what mattered most. Episode 4: A Brother's Grief. The glade grew still after the wormling vanished. The trees swayed lightly in the breeze, but to Milo, the world felt frozen. He knelt in the moss, holding Mira's body against him. She was light in his arms, far too light, and yet the weight pressed down harder than stone. Blood clung to him everywhere, on his vest, his arms, his hands. It soaked into the moss, spreading outward in dark patches that looked too large for her small frame. The herbs she had gathered lay scattered like offerings gone to waste. Flowers mixed with blood, their colors sharp against the ruin of the clearing. Milo's chest heaved, but no words came. Grief tore soundlessly at him, until finally it broke through in raw, shaking cries. He struck the ground with his fists, clawed at the moss until it tore loose in clumps. His nails scraped his own skin, leaving red trails across his arms. He wanted to hurt. He wanted his pain to match hers, as though it could balance what had been taken. But the forest gave nothing back. At last, exhaustion dulled the fury. His sobs fell to silence. He looked down and noticed the bead still clutched in his hand, the small wooden one from Mira's broken necklace. It was cracked, ugly, worn smooth by her fingers, yet treasured above the others. She had once called it her favorite because of its flaws. With shaking hands, Milo tore a strip of cord from his vest and strung the bead upon it. He tied it twice and slipped it over his neck. The bead rested against his chest, heavy as a stone, a reminder too sharp to touch again. He wrapped Mira gently in his cloak. Her body felt weightless, as though the part of her that had laughed and danced through the veil had already slipped away. He smoothed the hair from her brow, tucking one pale flower into her hand, the last kindness he could offer. The shadows lengthened as the sun dipped lower. Soon the forest would be swallowed in night. He could not leave her here, alone in the glade. She belonged to the vale, to her family, to the hearth that had raised her. With slow, steady effort, he lifted her into his arms. She did not weigh much, but carrying her was the hardest thing he had ever done. The wound at his side still burned, blood still trickling down, but he ignored it. His legs shook, yet he took the first step away from the glade, then another. The path stretched long and unkind. The forest leaned close, its branches whispering above him, its shadows darker than before. He felt the weight of its judgment in every tree. His flail hung unused at his side, swinging with his stride, a weapon meaningless against absence. The silence pressed hard. No birds stirred, no insect sang. Only the sound of his own breathing and the faint thump of the wooden bead against his chest filled the air. A rhythm of grief. At the forest's edge, dusk painted the vale in orange and shadow. Hearth fires burned in distant windows. Children's laughter carried faintly from the river. Life continued, untouched. Milo walked through it like a ghost, unseen. carrying the truth that had broken him. When he reached the garden path of the Sharproot cottage, the door was already open. Hamlin stood in the doorway, his stillness breaking as his eyes fell on the bundle in his son's arms. Inside, Brenna's hand slipped, and the sound she made was unlike any word, unlike any cry. It was grief given voice, sharp and endless. Milo lowered Mira into his father's arms and collapsed to his knees. His mother clutched her daughter's satchel, burying her face in the torn fabric, as though she could pull time backward. The house filled with the sound of loss, the kind of sound that leaves marks on the walls and hearts alike. The veil buried Mira beneath the willow fire tree. Villagers came with candles, flowers, and stones carved with her name. They laid small gifts at her grave, gentle offerings for a gentle soul. Her parents wept openly. Milo stood apart, silent, his eyes fixed on the forest's edge. For 3 days he did not speak. Episode 5. The Silence That Followed. The days after Mira's death moved slowly, each one weighed down by silence. The Sharproot home no longer felt alive. The hearth still burned, but its warmth did not reach the family who sat in its light. Brenna clutched Mira's torn satchel, holding it to her chest, as though she could draw her daughter back from the fabric itself. Hamlin carried his grief like stone, saying nothing, his hands trembling whenever they brushed against the table where Mira once sat. Milo did not speak at all. He lingered outside or sat at the edge of the clearing, eyes fixed on the forest. His flail rested untouched. His silence was heavier than words could have been. The village mourned with them. The whole of Thorn Vale came to pay respect. Some brought pressed flowers. Others brought stones etched with her name. Candles flickered in the evening air, their small flames bending with the wind. These were not grand gestures, but quiet offerings for a girl who had lived with lightness. Milo stood apart from the gathering. He did not touch the flowers or add a stone. He only watched, his face hard, his chest rising with shallow breaths. The bead from Mira's broken necklace hung around his neck, its cracked edge biting against his skin. He had tied it there in the glade, and now it beat against him with each step, a reminder of failure and a burden he would not put down. When the last villager drifted away, the vale grew quiet again. The willow fire leaves shifted softly, silver in the breeze. The ground at Mira's grave was fresh and dark, pressed down by the weight of earth. Milo knelt there only once. He did not weep. His grief had turned inward, sharp as a blade. 3 nights passed before he made his choice. The house was still. His parents sat at the table, their faces carved by sorrow. Brenna's gaze was empty, her hands folded around nothing. Hamlin stood as though bracing against a storm no one could see. Neither spoke when Milo moved quietly through the room, gathering what little he would take. Dried meat, a flask of water, a strip of bandages. He strapped on his vest and fastened the flail to his side. The wooden bead thumped faintly against his chest, each beat marking a vow not yet spoken. Outside, the night was clear. The air smelled of dew and ash. Above him, stars blinked in scattered lines, their light dim against the dark forest. The veil slept, but Milo felt awake in a way he never had before. Grief had stripped away the boy who trained in the hunter circle. What remained was something harder. At the edge of the garden, he stopped. The willow fire tree rose in the distance, its leaves glowing faintly in the starlight. Beneath it, his sister rested. The bead pressed into his chest again, heavy and unyielding. He did not speak aloud, but the vow settled deep within him. Her death would not fade into silence. It would not be another story whispered by the veil and forgotten. He would carry it with him into the woods, into the world, until he found a way to make it mean something. Milo stepped forward. The forest accepted him, branches closing overhead, shadows stretching long across the path. Mist rose in thin ribbons, wrapping around his legs as though to mark his passage. The glow of the cottage dimmed behind him, fading into memory. He walked without looking back. The silence that followed was not only grief. It was the silence before a storm. The silence of a boy remade by loss, carrying a cracked bead and a burden of resolve into the waiting dark. Thank you for listening to The Thorn Beneath the Roots, the epic backstory of Milo Sharproot. Join us next time on Free Your Geek for more Fantasy Fable Fridays.